What is an asset? At the end of the day, it is a resource that you own or control that you can sell for money or sell or share. And so, what is in your business that your clients are paying you for? Is there a method that you bring? Is there some research that you bring? Is there training or workshops that you bring? Whatever it is that your client is paying you for, that is the asset in your business.
I'm Samantha Hartley of Profitable Joyful Consulting, and today I'm talking with Erin Austin, who is an IP attorney, founder of Think Beyond IP, who helps consultants and other entrepreneurs to figure out what their unique assets are so that they can not be just scalable, but also sellable. You'll also hear the number one kind of agreement that you definitely need to have with your clients that you probably don't have right now. Erin, would you tell us a story of someone that you've worked with that illustrates a little bit for us of what you do?
Yeah, well, this is a bit of a pandemic story where someone had something that they hadn't really thought about until forced to go online. And so this client teaches neurodivergent children social skills. Really wonderful program, but she was local and she did it one on one in person with those students. And then everything had to go online. And as she was doing it, she had these inquiries about, I would like to have my kid have access to this as well. How can we get these services closer to me? And so from that, she came to me. She decided she wanted to license her program. And so we put together a complete package for her to one, obviously the license agreement is very important, but also the whole process of figuring out who is going to be the right licensee, what type of training, what kind of background they should have, how we're going to charge for, what type of education or certification process there will be, and how to keep making sure they get value from using her program. And so that was a fun one. It was a great story just because it was such a needed program and it was just opportunity knocked and she opened the door.
Absolutely. So it sounds like it's unique amongst your kinds of clients you work with. So what's a more typical kind of thing that you would do? What kind of services?
Yeah, more typically, we have service providers. They're very
Hmm.
used to selling their time and they're not thinking about how they are acquiring and controlling intellectual property assets in their business. And so we work together to make sure that we are creating an inventory of what they have, that we are putting together a suite of agreements so that they understand the process of how to own and control assets through the contract process. And then when they're ready to be able to put together that licensing, if that's the next step for them.
How did you get started doing this and what's your background?
Well, I've been a lawyer for quite some time, and I basically grew up in the corporate world. And so, being from general counsel, COO, and outside counsel to large IP driven companies. And then there came a time where, you've done it for a while and you're looking for another challenge and to work with a different population. For me personally, I wanted to be able to work with smaller businesses. And it took me a while to figure out, like, where do I fit? How do I take my big company experience and work with smaller businesses? But at the end of the day, I'm like, well, professional services and experts, they all have intellectual property. So I can help translate what the big companies have in-house counsel to worry about these things, to help translate kind of the IP speak into how it applies to their businesses and how they can use it to create leverage in their businesses.
It's so interesting because I had the same kind of situation when I left Coke. And you're in a situation or in an environment where people are constantly talking about brand, the value of the brand all the time. And up until recently, when we had this kind of influx of young influencers realizing that personal branding is a thing, I went for years working in businesses and they never mentioned brand or anything like that. And I imagine they also never mentioned IP. It's only been the past, several years, but about half the time I've been self-employed that anybody ever even mentioned IP. So do you find yourself having to do a lot of education of like what are we even talking about?
Yes. I mean, it really surprised me when you like spend career in the trenches of like all day, everyday IP. And I'm going to think of all the companies, and this is probably similar when you have kind of IP based companies, the CEOs are lawyers and they're very focused on it. And so you leave that and people are like, what, huh? And so there's a lot of education that I've had to do. Like, oh, I don't know. I'm not ready for IP yet. I'm like, you make IP every day, you know? And so there's been a lot of education required. Yes.
Our audience are women consultants, and a lot of them are working with these larger companies that you and I came from. But some of them are also working with smaller companies of, 1 to 10 million. And I know in my experience, when I'm working with my clients, I'll say one of the things you can do to double your prices, one of the fastest way to double your prices is just to take your IP and charge separately for that, so that there's the time that you're spending coaching or consulting, and then there's the actual content on which, or the foundation of the coaching and consulting. And that IP, you can charge for that. And that has been like this revelation for a lot of my clients, that there was this thing. Is there anyone you're working with who doesn't have IP?
Literally, the only people who don't own any IP is if you are just a hired hand. Like you just sit around and they call you and say, I need you to just come in and I have something for you to do and just execute it. And if you're known for anything, like they go, I want to go to you instead of to this person over there because you do this and they don't, then that thing that you do that they don't is your intellectual property.
Well, that's super helpful, because to me, if you don't have your own IP, you're probably executing somebody else's IP. So in the situation you just described, like come in and do this, they're wanting you to execute their IP. Like
Yeah.
that's either an SOP, standard operating procedures. They're going to have their own processes that they use that they're asking you to come in and implement. It sounds like you're saying.
Right.
So how do you help a woman consultant to basically like realize what all she has around her that is IP?
First is recognizing the fact that you do have intellectual property and assets. I like to use the term assets so we can think about it the way that, say, a clothing store thinks about it. Like, what is an asset? At the end of the day, it is a resource that you own or control that you can sell for money or sell or share. And so, what is in your business that your clients are paying you for? Is there a method that you bring? Is there some research that you bring? Is there training or workshops that you bring? Whatever it is that your client is paying you for, that is the asset in your business. And so we know that you're getting paid, you're successful. That's why you're here. So the question is, are you controlling the rights in those assets? So are you making sure that you own it from conception? So let's say there's a lot of reliance in certain quarters on like third party certifications. And when you do that, you may get some materials from them and you're allowed to use those materials for your one on one clients. But when you talk about what you help them do, which is to create leverage by separating out that IP and selling it separately, well, generally, you won't have the right to do that if you're too reliant on third party materials. Typically, you'll have the right to use it with your one on one, but you won't have the right to use it in the one to many scenario. So, we want to make sure that we have our own original materials. And then once we have those, then we are protecting them. Typically, when we're talking about workshops and trainings and things like that, those are copyrightable works. And so we want to make sure that they're eligible for copyright protection. Of course, I'm talking about US law here. So under US law, it has to be original and has to be created by a human being. So not your AI work. And there has to be a minimum level of creativity. And that's a pretty low threshold. And so it's about the expression. So people say, well, what's original? Does that mean it's like, something genius that no one ever heard of before? It's like, no, it just means that you didn't copy it. It means you created it independently. You can take the most tired idea in the world, like, how to be a good leader, but how you talk about it, how you write about it, how you teach it, those skills like that, when you create those workshops and things, then it has to be original to you, meaning you didn't copy somebody else. And so once we have that, then we need to make sure that we don't lose control over it because we're just giving the rights away to our clients. So if you have corporate clients, probably you're getting contracts, their template from them and asking you to sign it. And many people just sign them because I know, because I send them out for my clients and the other side just signs without reading or doing anything. And those agreements will be very client friendly. And they're going to say that anything that you deliver to them, they own. And we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we are retaining the rights in our workshops, in our original materials. And so that they, one, not only do you retain the ownership of them, but also how they can be reused. If you read some of that language, it will basically say you keep your existing materials like, oh, great, I get to keep my existing materials. But then it'll say that you license to the client the right to make copies, distribute, make derivatives, to sublicense and resell, and all the things that you can do as a copyright owner. You just gave those rights to your client to do those things. So they don't need you anymore. If they're a worldwide company and you've provided workshop for the one office, well, they can take it and use it everywhere around the world if you haven't controlled those rights. So that's almost kind of a self-inflicted wound, frankly, if we're not making sure that we are reading and understanding, using contracts correctly. And so those are the big things, making sure we have our own original materials and that we are retaining control of them.
It's super helpful. And I feel like I've seen a lot of those contracts come across, and I think it's just not obvious. And even though you read every single word of a thing, I think I've seen situations where your eyes glaze over and you feel like, well, I don't understand it. Probably it's no big deal. And I really, really need this money. And then you agree to do it. And then, as you're saying, it's a self inflicted wound. Let's say I've been consulting with my clients for about 3 years. I have like a 5-step process, and I generally do things about the same way. What are the steps to turning that into an asset?
The natural progression from kind of custom one-on-one to creating something that you can independently sell or license without you is starting to document. So it starts with just documenting your process so that every time you're delivering it, it's getting better, it's getting more efficient to deliver, the end result is more reliable, and you're starting to see the kind of the commonalities among your clients. Assuming you have a niche, you'll see like how I can make sure that this process works for the people, the problems that they have. And then at some point, maybe you'll deliver like a formal SOP process. And then when you do that, you'll be able to use, other experts or be able to outsource parts of it, and that won't need you. And so you'll become even more efficient. And then as you continue to learn, maybe you'll get to a point where you have this down in a way that can be standardized among most clients. And then you're ready to create a DIY type of program for your clients. So my favorite is when you have the corporate client, you're doing those one-on-one services with them, and you become fully engaged. And like, how do I grow? I work more? No. Or I hire another expert? Maybe, maybe not. Or do I have another offer that will allow them to get the benefit of what I do, but without me being there personally? And that's when it's time for you to package. Hopefully, you already have your whole system. And it's a matter of making it in a way that, someone who's not an expert like you, but who has some background can use. But you also want to make sure that it's protected first. So you want to make sure that you've put it in a tangible form that you can register with the Copyright Office, get that done, and then you're ready to start licensing it.
So then I would, in this scenario, I would take that 7-step process. I've proven that with clients. I can make a big promise about it. If you follow this along and implement, then in the end, you can expect outcome, outcome, outcome.
Correct.
I do all of that part. I've registered it with the Copyright Office because I have it in a big binder. And also I've recorded some videos that go along with this. I take that. And then what needs to happen?
Well, then hopefully, if you have already proven yourself with this market, you would, the benefit of doing it to your same corporate clients is that you're fishing in the same pond, right? You're not trying to find a whole new audience of people. And so the legal details are done. Like when you've registered it and you have your license agreement template, you're ready to go to your clients and offer that. And typically, when you have a licensing product, try to keep changes to a minimum. You don't want to have too many differences among the license agreements with your clients that are now your licensees. There will be some negotiation. I mean, I have clients who have those license agreements, and depending on the nature of the licensee, like how big the deal is and things like that, we will tolerate some changes to it. But you do want to make sure that it's not going to change the way you do business. Don't ever let any change do that, because that reduces the profitability of your license.
They have licensed it, which means what?
A license is the right to use someone else's intellectual property. So basically, you're giving permission to someone else to use it. The bucket of exclusive rights that we get as copyright owners is, the right to make copies of it, distribute it, to perform it, to display it, and to make derivatives. And so we can either sell those rights outright and just say those are yours, or we can license them, and that just gives them permission to use those rights that I would have. So think of a publishing company. That's just a license to publish it. It's not a license to make a movie. It's not a license to do anything else with it or create a sequel. It's just the license to publish and make copies and distribute that book. And so the same thing would apply to your licenses with your corporate clients who have before been your one on one client and now is going to be a licensee. And we're going to give them the right to use that material internally. Of course, I mean, we'll have those restrictions in there. We use it internally and how long and how much it will cost. And so that is the nature of your license agreement. It is completely contractual, whatever terms the parties can come up with. Now, if we have a whole kind of program of licensing, we'll just definitely want to have standardized terms. You, for the most part, are going to have non exclusive licenses with your current clients and future licensees.
Okay. They could buy 10 of my home study, how to keep your best leaders course for $3,000 a piece, or they could license the whole thing for $50,000 and then give that to everybody in their organization.
Yeah. So technically, like when you say they buy, what they're buying is that unit. They're not buying any IP rights, actually. So the IP rights are staying with you, and the ability to use it is just because they have their personal copy. So let's just think about a book, for instance. So I buy a book and I have not received any intellectual property rights in that book. I own that unit and I can use it for my own personal use. I can read it and learn from it and implement what I learn in my business. But I don't have any of those rights to reproduce, to distribute, to perform, display, to make derivatives. All of those IP rights stay with the copyright owner. And the same would apply here. So you can either sell units of a training. And so let's say in that instance, they would have it and they'd have the ability to use it internally in perpetuity versus something that they are licensing and there would be kind of the license period around that, the license fee around that. For instance, when we go on and we do an online course, like we probably not a single one of us reads the terms and conditions, but in there, there's a license in there that tells you what you can do with those materials like that. And it has those limits in there and you're paying a fee to access it.
Right. That makes sense. What's an example of some assets that a similar business to our kinds of business had, and what were you able to do with them?
They would be training. Like a big one is HR consultants who do training. And so typically that will be that train the trainer license where they are putting together what they would otherwise be delivering one on one. And we put together a license agreement for them to license that to their clients versus those who have books. Now, typically people who have books don't come to me. There's not anything that complicated, frankly, about selling your books. I mean, there's a very well established process for that. So if you have something that you want to sell as a standalone product, courses, books, and then services agreements, of course, is a big part of what I do for people helping with those corporate client agreements.
And the service agreements are the things that make sure that they know, listen, this is not just yours to take and do whatever you want to with.
That's correct.
I think a lot of people experience when they've had an officially published book is that they don't actually make that much money off of the book. So what if they wanted to do something like a workbook that was related to their original work, but they wanted to do a workbook and license that? So how might something like that work?
Yeah. So a workbook is a derivative of the original book. So in this instance, they have their book, they register it in the Copyright Office, and they want to create a derivative. And that's one of the exclusive rights that they have as the owner of the copyright in that book. And so you create your derivative work. And if you want to license it, I mean, it sounds more like it's be something that you would sell alongside your book, but it could be if you are instead creating some sort of training program that you're then licensing to your clients or your former clients, then it would just be part of the materials that are part of the license. So every license agreement will have the license content or the license material, whatever that would be defined in your license agreement. What exactly is being licensed? So is it the recordings and the videos and the worksheets and the workbook in this case? And it would state exactly what is being licensed because there may be some portions of what you do that's not included. Maybe there is some sort of certification program or something that is not included. And so you want to define what's included. But if you had a workbook that went with a training that was licensed, then that would just be included in those materials. But if you had a book that was a standalone book, but you just wanted to have this additional material to help them implement and understand the book, then they would probably sell that rather than license it.
And by sell it, you mean sell it once for, 20 bucks a piece as opposed to licensing it to an organization.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. What about this is another scenario that I've seen people do is certifying other people to deliver their materials. So someone is like, I'm completely busy and swamped with clients, but I know that other people might want to do this same process. So either they license this to one of their corporate clients and then they kind of deputize someone within that organization to be the leader within their organization of the content, or they create like certified fellow consultants or fellow trainers who can then go in and do that.
Yeah. And that is another example of a license. And so in this case, instead of your corporate clients being the licensee, these other service providers are going to become the licensee. And then that license would give them the permission to use your materials with their own clients, not with your clients, but with their own clients. The trick of that one is that you are creating competitors and it has a number of differences. It seems similar, but one of the challenges is that it is a different market. And so you have to develop that market to make sure that it stays profitable because you will need to invest some resources in it. You'll need to make sure that they continue to get value out of using your program. I mean, if too much of program is your genius and you can't really train other people to do it, then they're not going to continue to pay you license fees if they can't get the same results for their clients. And that also could impact the way people see your program. So that there's that issue as well. You kind of lose a little bit of control over its delivery. Where we need to be careful is that we don't somehow become a franchise. And so basically a franchise, and it's state by state. So it's just as ugly as it can be, but it basically, and it's very highly regulated. So that's why it's ugly.
Good.
You have to, yeah. So it's like, a public offering basically. And so there's a lot that has to go into having a franchise. And when you don't meet the registration rules, you get in trouble. And so we trip into a franchise when we have a trademark that is part of our license. And then we have some sort of control over the way the person delivers the work. And so the way we get around that is either maybe you don't do the trademark. So it doesn't matter how much control you have. If there's no trademark involved, it's not going to be a license. But if part of the value is in the trademark, being able to say, I was certified by, and so we do have the trademark that goes along with it. We want to make sure that they're not using their trademark in the name. When we franchise a McDonald's, we don't call it Joe's Pizza Shop with McDonald's burgers. It is McDonald's. And similarly, we want to make sure that it's not their entire business. When you do go to Joe's Pizza Shop and they have a Coca-Cola machine, they have the trademark and they pay for it, but it's not their whole business. They're not a Coca-Cola shop. It is just one menu item in the whole business. And if we are going to have certified providers that includes a trademark, that includes a license fee and includes some sort of control over how they deliver, then we want to make sure that they have a going business, that it's just one menu item. They already have a business there. That's not their whole business.
I'm thinking more the model of like DISC or certified Franklin Covey trainer or something like that.
Yeah. So those are where they aren't still providing the service, right? As opposed to what we were talking about, somebody who's, I'm still providing the service, but I also have other providers. There are certification programs. So that is different. That is a separate kind of area of trademark. As a whole thing there where you have organizations that aren't actually providing that service still, and all they're doing is certifying. Yeah. I don't know that would apply to this audience, but yeah.
Well, it might, because I do have people who are like looking at the end of, I'm going to work for another 10 years. And then I might want to kind of like put these, like my little puppies out into the world and let them go and continue to impact my clients.
Right. Yeah.
Or the clients that I'll never be able to impact personally, but I'll be able to impact my audience.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
What are the things that a consultant should look at right now to be able to leverage the things that you're talking about. I definitely heard service agreements because I think that that's just something that too often we're naively kind of like making these agreements and forgetting about the fact that a large company might be keeping in mind that they can take this IP and do something with it. So, what are the other things that consultants need to keep in mind?
There's definitely kind of three parts I like to think about. One is starting with the audit. We want to make sure that we understand what is in our business, both the quality and the quantity of the assets in our business. Do we have original materials or is everything from a third party? Do I need to start creating my own original materials? Let's say you have all of your coaching materials from is it International Federation of Coaches, I think, and you're using all their materials and you don't have anything that's original, but you've developed a niche, like you are working only with fitness coaches or something. And so you are learning what things are specific, like how to tailor those general materials you may be getting from IFC and making them very specific to your audience. You're creating some new original materials that directly affect based on your experience of working with them. So you're starting to build your own library of original works that you can then protect and own and control. And so, one, making sure we actually are creating our own original stuff. And if we are heavily reliant on third party materials and we want to someday be able to go to a one to many model, then we need to be thinking about getting the permission to do that. And so when you're ready for that, then making sure you're getting permission for it, but understanding what you own and what you don't own so you do not get in trouble, that you don't invest a bunch of money to create a course and then you don't own it, right? Then protection agreements, as we mentioned, and registration are the key ways that we want to protect things. People think that people are going to steal their stuff. And usually it's not that people just like kind of bad actors. It's usually either lack of understanding that they don't have the right agreements in place, or they just are accidentally using things because they don't understand that it's not free because it's on the internet. And so we just want to make sure that we are doing those things that minimize the risk, mostly of the accidental infringement versus the bad actor infringement. So we're using our copyright notices and things like that and registering it. And the last thing would be to leverage it, to pull those things together into some sort of asset that can be delivered that derives revenue without you in the room or on the Zoom call, as it may be. Yeah.
For real. In the experiences I've seen where there was kind of IP infringement, whether it's my stuff or someone else's that I've seen, it was someone being just naive and
Yeah.
thinking, oh, I didn't realize I couldn't just copy that, which is extremely naive, but you never know. Like, let's try to give people credit. But in general, I'm just wondering how casual we can be and when. If you're doing like a round table for 15 people who have come from LinkedIn and you're presenting your stuff and maybe you have some handouts that you give out, do you need to, I mean, besides just the copyright at the bottom of that, do you need to have something more to say, like, by the way, this is my asset and you can't just like take this and copy it and use it in your own business? How formal do we need to be?
Yeah. How many resources we commit to something does depend on how valuable it is. And so for the things that are our money makers, so our courses, our workshops, things like that, I recommend for the formality of registration. And for the other things, the things that we create all the time, the stuff we put on our LinkedIn, the stuff that we have on our website, our email newsletters, the things that if someone were to take it, we'd be irritated. We might send them a cease and desist, but we're not going to hire a lawyer, right? And go to the masses, so to speak. Those things we don't need to have be as formal about. And at the end of the day, you can't copyright ideas. You can't protect ideas. And so copyright will protect someone from literally just lifting your work and copying it, right? But it won't prevent someone from ingesting your work and taking the ideas from it and creating their own works or trainings or materials from that. And so it is more important for us to think about our positioning, making sure we are considered a thought leader. There'll always be somebody else who can do what we do, probably. But why are they going to come to you? Because of the connection that you've made, because of the work that you've put in to be helpful to them before that, and to be recognized as the leader in the space. And that's what I would recommend people to focus a little bit more on there.
Good, good. I think that's a good way to think about it is don't get whacked out about these things. Can we wrap up with another inspiring story? I've loved hearing your examples of what other consultants and coaches and entrepreneurs have done to create assets that actually become extensions of themselves and help them to expand their businesses. So, can you share another one with us?
Well, am I allowed to tell a personal one?
Please.
Yeah. Well, as a lawyer, we are literally the worst. And so this would apply as well to not selling our time and creating leverage, and I have spent a career selling my time. There's no other way to put that than that. And when people ask, how long have you been in business? I'm like, well, depends on how you define that. I've been selling my time as a solo for a while, but it's only in the last couple of years that I have been developing assets, creating processes. It's crazy. I mean, how many services agreements have I reviewed in my life? I can't. And from the first word to the last word, just out of my head. And then finally putting processes in place to become more efficient. That helps me to train other people as well to do it. And as well as, using those steps that I use to help educate kind of DIY people who are service providers who just need some help to review their own. And so creating products from that. And so when I think about working less, creating more, not altogether passive, but a more leveraged income, that is the transition that I'm going through in my business. I like to say that I'm my own avatar, making sure that I am documenting things, creating products, creating thought leadership, becoming known in the marketplace. So all those things. So for me, it's been a great transition as well, just because I get to, instead of making big companies bigger, which is what I spent a lot of years doing, helping a different group of people understand the value in their businesses and help them, not just have income generators, but wealth builders.
And what's a favorite asset that you've done in this endeavor?
Well, I have an NDA navigator. And so basically, when we have corporate clients, a lot of times signing an NDA is like just to have the sales call. Like you can't even have a sales call without one. And so there is no revenue attached to that. And so I created an NDA navigator. When you get the agreement from the client and you have to review it, then what do you do? And so that helps you kind of understand what every provision is and why it's important and, how to negotiate it. So that's
I love it.
excited about that one. Yeah.
So that's an example of something someone would have hired you and you would have talked them through this process. And instead you created an asset that someone can purchase and they can just do that themselves without having to hire you and without them having to just like wing it.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't have talked them through it. I would have just done it.
Oh, yeah. You would have just walked through it. So you're like, you can handle this on your own if you know this information, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. But that's great. So then here's like your time. You don't have to spend, as you've said, like you've done this a million times, and I'm sure you don't need to see another one. And like, I can just buy that. And then I don't need to bug you, pay a lot more for it. I can just use this. So really a super cool example. So my question for my audience is, what's a thing that people hire you to do and you've done like 10 million times, but you could basically talk them through how to do it? My deal is always like, nobody's going to do it exactly like you do it. But if you can get them like 85, 90% of the way there, and then they can take that and do that on their own. And then, especially if it's the kind of thing where you're like, I wouldn't lose a minute's sleep if I never, ever did this particular process again. That's a great thing to license.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, maybe that's a signal like, I can't do it again. Maybe that's time to create a product.
I'm going to make a product out of that. Really good one. Well, I'm so glad you used a personal example because that I immediately understand. And I think it's really inspiring. And it's always good to walk your talk, isn't it?
Yes.
Super. Where can our listeners find out more about you?
My website is thinkbeyondip.com. I also get some good freebies there as well. I hang out at LinkedIn. And I've been on there so long that I am the OG Erin Austin. So you can find me there. And then I have a podcast called Hourly to Exit, where I talk about building scalable and hopefully someday saleable service-based businesses.
Awesome. The thing that we all want. Maybe we don't all.
Exactly.
I do. A lot of my clients want that. So awesome. It's been just great to talk with you today, Erin. Really appreciate you and your time.
Well, thank you for having me.
So how awesome was Erin? I loved hearing these ideas. It's super stimulating. So here's what I want to challenge you to do. First, what was your number one takeaway? When you think back on all that Erin spoke about, what really stands out to you as the thing that you can take action on first? For me, it's the idea of exiting my business. Like, I love that idea. Not just folding it up when we decide to retire and then letting it dissolve, but like creating real value in the business now so that there is something to sell when we retire. That's not always the case with consulting businesses. So that was my number one takeaway. Begin with the end in mind. Think about my exit and all of the things that I could be doing between now and then to create sellable assets. What was your number one takeaway? I would love to hear that from you on the socials, and whether you share it or not, really keep that in mind. Let's make sure that we turn everything we're hearing here into actionable strategies. With that, I am wishing you a profitable and joyful consulting business.
Thank you for watching. To learn more about how to build a consulting business where you work exclusively with perfect clients on transformational engagements and build a profitable and joyful consultancy, then please subscribe to our channel and be sure to click the bell to get notifications when new episodes come out.